8:22 here at KTRS, the Big 550. Jake Hansler filling in for McGraw. And we're joined now by Tony Messenger, columnist with the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Jay. Good morning, Kelly. How's everybody doing?
Kelly's doing well. I can tell you that. She just stepped away, but I'm great. Great. You have a piece in the Post-Dispatch on MLS tax credits and Governor Jay Nixon's last stand.
Yeah, the governor called a bunch of different media, met with some Post-Dispatch reporters, and then I think he met with some other reporters as well on Friday. And I sort of call him the cheerleader in chief. He's pushing for the MLS stadium to come to St. Louis, and he's sort of pushing back against the man who's going to replace him, Governor-elect Eric Greitens, who I think perhaps in this episode is getting a little bit of a lesson on what the difference between campaigning and governing is. When Governor-elect Greitens came out with a very strong statement against what he called welfare for millionaires in terms of any tax credits for the stadium, it really changed things. He hadn't had a conversation with the SESTL group that's trying to bring the MLS here, and they're now trying to quickly arrange a meeting. But, you know, when the governor says things like this is just welfare for millionaires and basically left himself no wiggle room, it changes the dynamics. And that's a little bit different than when you're campaigning and you say things off the cuff that are really strong. Maybe that's exactly what Governor Eric Greitens believes, and we'll find out in time if that's truly what he believes, and there will be no more, state subsidies for development. But my guess is after a meeting, maybe he backs off a little bit and tries to find a middle ground.
It reminds me a little bit of our president-elect and his off-the-cuff tweets. But in this particular instance, I have to side, at least initially, with Governor-elect Greitens. The city of St. Louis has many, many needs, and frankly, a higher sales tax, which is the most regressive kind of tax, probably isn't one of them.
Well, I'm not a big fan of increasing the sales tax, but keep in mind on this proposal, there's not a proposal to increase the sales tax for soccer. There's a proposal to increase the sales tax for transit expansion, which I think will clearly pass and is a massive need in our community that'll create tremendous economic opportunity. If that sales tax passes, the use tax automatically increases. The question that Mayor Slay wants to put before voters is, if this use tax also increases, can we spend some of those proceeds on a soccer stadium? That's a different question than going to the voters and saying, will you increase a half-cent sales tax to pay for soccer? And that's where there's at least a pretty fair amount of nuance in this proposal. The important part of the proposal is really the mass transit expansion. And it would be a much easier question, as everything would be in St. Louis, if it wasn't just a question for the city. If the city and county did things together, if there was automatic regional cooperation as there is in many communities. Instead, we're asking city taxpayers to foot the bill for the entire region. That's the part of it that is always difficult to swallow in these discussions in St. Louis.
Should we have any concern that the now Governor Nixon may be jumping ahead to his private career in being the cheerleader-in-chief on this one?
We should always pay attention to that. I don't have any information that that's true. The governor says he's got no plans once he's in the private sector to be involved in this. But it's worth noting in stadium-type discussions that the former chief of staff of the mayor has been very involved in stadium discussions as he was when he was chief of staff. And so that sort of precedent exists in these situations. It's always worth watching. I don't think there's any evidence in this case that the governor is trying to feather his own nest. He has consistently been in favor of stadium expansions going back to his time as a state senator. And so I don't think that's it's a fair question to ask. I don't think it's a fair criticism at this point of the governor.
Do we need another stadium, Tony? I mean, with so many other needs, is this the right place to put $80 million? Regardless of how it is raised, it could always be applied to education or to jobs or to police. As we creep up on a new record with homicides, there's an argument that maybe we need to fix a few of the problems we have and then move on to another toy.
If I were to argue priorities, MLS Soccer Stadium would not be number one amongst them. It probably would not be in the top 5. What people always remind me in these discussions is that that's not how economic opportunity tends to happen, that there are different piles of money that you're talking about as it relates to how money gets spent in terms of development. I do think the opportunity for MLS to come to this city and build on some of the economic momentum that I think this city has in terms of outside investors taking a look at St. Louis is relatively uniquely timed. And so I think that has to be part of the conversation. But I'm with you. If the question was, St. Louis has a pile of $80 million, where can we spend it? Well, my first choice is always education. But that's not how it happens. Can we get the legislature to spend $80 million on public education in the St. Louis region? I think probably not. And that's where that money tends to come from. And so there is an element of different piles of money in these conversations that is an important part of the conversation when you're talking about how you do economic development deals.
Right. Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch columnist, a great thought-provoking piece in the paper on the MLS Stadium and tax credits. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jay. Talk to you later.
Absolutely. It is 8:29, 33 degrees.